Hello, your story stinks. This time we're going to be talking about God of War Ragnarok, which I know is going to make some people really unhappy. Now, I want to say before we get into it that I don't think I've reviewed games yet, because part of the problem with reviewing games is that usually story is not the main part of the games. Okay? And the other part is that more often than not, it's pretty obvious why they're not good. Okay? Like, you don't need to hear me talk about, like, Kingdom Hearts to know why that story is bad. Like, everybody's automatically familiar with it. You don't need, like, me to sit down and say, yeah, the stories of Assassin's Creed are garbage, because everybody both A, knows that, and B, expects it, and it's like, when it comes to games, a lot of times you can sort of ignore bad stories, because if the gameplay itself is good, it can be worth playing. And the other thing is, gamers tend to have, I want to say, a thicker skin when it comes to bad stories. Like, you have people out there who think that, like, Final Fantasy, like, 7, 8, and 10 all have great stories, and it's just like, no. And I know I just, like, slaughtered a sacred cow by saying that Final Fantasy 7 has a bad story, and it does, because it's nonsensical, overly complicated, overly long, and is melodramatic to the point where it's almost comical. And on top of that, it's needlessly complex for no reason. And I know this isn't about that, but a lot of people will ignore all of that because stories that are told over like 100 hours can afford to be that way, because you're not sitting down in one sitting to absorb it. You're absorbing the story almost episodically. And so you never like a story that is condensed, where if you sat down and said, okay, here's the story in half an hour, it sounds stupid and ludicrous. If you take that same story and extend it over like 100 hours, your brain doesn't remember every, tiny detail, and so everything kind of makes sense. Now, what does it have to do with God of War? So, God of War Ragnarok is a sequel to God of War. It is the reboot of a series that was adolescent, I guess is the way to put it. I don't really know what the right word is. Immature? Like, it's of its time. So the original God of War series is super violent and super edgy and is, like, chasing a teenage demographic. It is about a very angry man committing horrible acts against other people who he feels have wronged him, some of which have, most of which have not. It is ostensibly taking all of its inspiration from the Iliad, where Kratos is our Achilles figure, where the tragedy is all because of his rage. Okay? It is taken, like, all of its inspiration from Achilles. Throughout the story, Kratos makes many mistakes, and he does lots of bad things which turn around to bite him in the butt because of his rage. He is blinded by his anger and his hatred, and he commits horrible atrocities and ruins lots and lots of people's lives, including, most of the world, because he kills the sun and, plant life and the oceans and, basically everything. He just kills everything, destroys everyone. But I think a better summation of the kind of dynamic that the original games have is that in the first game, Kratos is like, I wanted power to protect my home, and the God of War Ares twisted that and made me kill my own family, and I am now super angry, and I'm so angry about it that I'm going to open Pandora's box and release great evils into the world, because it will allow me to get revenge. And as a result of him opening Pandora's box, he drives, Zeus and the other gods crazy, and they start doing other horrible things because they've been driven insane by all of the evils that he's released. Everything in God of War is Kratos' fault. That's the point, okay? The point is that everything is his fault. In not the remakes, I guess you could say in the sequels, like sequel games, sequel series, I don't know what you really call it, because they renamed the next one God of War, which is really confusing. But ostensibly, it's turned into a dad game, where the main character is a middle-aged dude with a beard who's constantly tired and has no time for anything. And how do I put this? It's very stupid. So the original God of War kind of has an excuse because, it's very much a prequel game. It exists ostensibly to set up the sequel, and everything in it is there's no full circle in the original game. It's like you're in it and you're thrust into a situation where this woman died. You don't know her. You have no point of reference for her because you never see her in the original game. You're just like, yeah, my wife's dead. We didn't know you had a wife. You also have a kid now, but we didn't, we have no context for any of this because we never see it. It just happens off screen, and now she's dead, and we're supposed to feel sad about this. And it's like, you can't because we have no attachment to this woman. But the whole thing is okay, I want to go bury her, and I'm just going to get attacked by Baldur over and over again. Baldur, meanwhile, who's completely insane and hates his life and hates everything about his life, and ostensibly curses his own existence at every passing opportunity, to the point where he's strangling his own mother, yelling about how much he hates her, and she's refuses to see sense, and then gets mad at you when you kill him, despite the fact that he was murdering her. Because of course, nobody in this, in that game makes any sense or follows logic. And that's something they double down on in the sequel. So here's where we're going to get into the biggest problem in the sequel. Nobody talks to each other. And I know that sounds really weird because sometimes it feels like they never shut up. But when I say nobody talks to each other, I mean nobody ever says the things that they need to say to each other. And so all of the plot happens because characters just refuse to communicate. Okay? It's the worst kind of plot because the plot relies on the idea that all of the characters refuse to act like human beings. They all refuse to just say what they need to say. They always avoid the conflict, avoid the conversations that they need to have for no reason. And so because of this, all of the plots end up feeling like the characters are just being stupid and super stubborn and bullheaded for no reason. Here's where we're going to get into it and get into spoilers. So if you don't build for anything, here's where you jump off, because we're just going to delve right into it. And the first scene, or I guess I should say the first major scene, kind of identifies all of the problems. So, Kratos and his son Loki are, out in the wilderness, and they're out doing hunting and trying to set up a ward totem or something, and they're attacked by Freya, and they fight her off, and they end up at home, and then they're in their house, and Fenrir dies, who is the dog of the dog of Loki, and Kratos, being a total asshole, is why are you sad that your dog died? Get over it. He's been dead for 10 seconds. What's wrong with you? And Loki is obviously pissed off about this, and nobody, like, Mimir doesn't even bother to be like, hey, Kratos, you're being a dick. And Kratos should understand this. He's had pets before. Like, he should understand, like, oh, I cared about this thing and it's dead. You know, he's your son. You should probably, like, I don't know, you know, understand what human emotion is. Because you spent most of your life doing nothing but feeling way too many emotions. And then they go home, and Thor shows up. And Thor shows up, and he's like, and Kratos is like, okay, I guess we're going to throw down. And Thor's like, actually, I'm here to talk to you. You know, like a human being. And I brought alcohol. So they go inside, and they sit down, and he pours them alcohol. And he's like, you wanted, like, and he's trying to be, like, civil and sociable and normal. And, like, have a talk with this dude who murdered his sons, I should add. Thor has shown up and is just there to talk to him, ostensibly. And Kratos reacts to him arriving by being a dick and essentially, like, showing him no hospitality or warmth because Kratos is a dead human being, essentially, and has no soul and is just bitter and hateful towards everyone for no reason. And, you know, Thor is just sitting there, and he's like, you killed my sons. And Kratos is like, well, actually, they died of their wounds that you gave them. He's like, well, they were useless anyway. And it's really tense and awkward. And then Odin shows up. And Odin is like, okay, look, we've gotten off on the wrong foot. Everything that has happened has been a horrible mistake and misunderstanding, and we've both been wronged, and we want to clear all this up because it's, you know, things have been going wrong and we don't want them to spiral. He's like, look, you killed 2 of Thor's sons, and we'll overlook that. You killed Baldur, and we don't really like that. But we're willing to overlook even that. In fact, I'm willing to somehow convince Freya to stop trying to murder you every time you step outside of your door. Like, every time you leave your house, Freya is ambushing you to try to murder you. I'm willing to stop her from doing that. Okay? I'm willing to forgive you for all of your transgressions against us. Okay? I'm willing to forgive you for removing Mir from prison. I'm willing to leave you alone and leave Midgard alone and just let you be. All you gotta do in exchange for this is stop looking into Tyr. Now, who's Tyr? Tyr is the war god of the pantheon of the Norse, who is dead. Or at least we think he's dead. And he disappeared, like, centuries ago. And Kratos has no idea, or had no idea, that Loki was looking into Tyr. Because Kratos wants nothing to do with this. Kratos wants absolutely nothing to do with other gods or anything else. He's like, I want to be here, and I want to, like, live alone and live out my days basically in a frozen wasteland and not know anybody else. Like, that's his dream, basically, is like, I'm going to live in this frozen hellhole alone, and I want no one to bother me. And so he's really pissed off that, you know, Loki has been, like, looking into Tyr, because he didn't know that he was doing that, and he pretty much told him repeatedly, don't look into this guy. You don't want to know about him. You shouldn't go looking for things. It's just going to cause you trouble. So Odin is just making a really good deal here, because he's willing to give Kratos everything he wants. And in fact, Kratos should be in agreement with him, because Kratos also doesn't want Loki looking into Tyr. Like, Kratos is mad that Loki is looking into this guy when he said don't do it. He's like, if you do it, bad things will happen. Don't look into him. Listen to me. Don't disobey me. Don't go looking into stuff like that without me, because bad things are going to happen. he also doesn't want Freya trying to murder him every time he's, walking out his front door. He doesn't want anything to do with the gods. He doesn't want anything to do with their problems. He wants to be left alone, and Odin is basically like, I'm willing to put everything aside if you just don't continue digging. Like, if you stop looking into Tyr, and we're cool. I'll put aside, I'll put aside the fact that you murdered both of Thor's sons. I'll put aside that you murdered Balder. I'll put aside that you stole Mimir out of prison. I will, forgive you, and I will leave you alone, and we will never see each other again, if you agree to stop looking into Tyr. That's all you gotta do. Okay? That's his bargain. And Kratos, for some reason, is like, no, I refuse to agree to this. Why? I don't know. Because, everything that is being offered is exactly what Kratos wants anyway. And Kratos himself also wants what Odin wants, which is for Loki to stop looking into this other war god. And yet, some reason, Kratos, for, some reason, is like, no, actually, I want to fight you. For some reason. And so then he and Thor fight, and Thor goads him on over and over again. And finally Kratos, fights him off. And so begins the first of many problems of this story, which is that Kratos has a confrontation with his son. And much of this game is Kratos having confrontations with his son. But the problem is that Kratos doesn't act in a way that makes any sense towards his son. Okay? Now, I think those of us who are adults can remember being teenagers and remember having fights with our parents and our parents telling us things and refusing to tell us why. They would say things like, do what I tell you, don't question it, just do it. Okay? Just listen to me, I know what I'm talking about. And, when you're a teenager, you don't want to listen to that. And so what should happen in a story like this is Kratos starts off by being like, listen to me, don't question it, still treating his son like a child. And then what should happen is that there should be progression where Kratos sits down with his son and goes like, you're a man now, you're an adult, and so I need to tell you things that I haven't told you before, because you're an adult. And I need to explain why I feel the way I am and why I've told you to do the things that I've told you to do. Okay, I need to treat you like an equal because you are now a man and you now deserve answers. The problem is that Kratos never has this point. And it causes all of the problems in the story, and yet the story seems to think that Kratos is blameless for this. Okay, so Loki, for example, is like, I really want to know who I am. I want to, I don't care if we have to go and fight the gods because the gods are unjust. There are times when you have to fight, and I believe that we're on the right, and, yeah, I want to go fight in war and all these other stuff. He's saying these things that make a lot of sense if you're a young man who has idealistic beliefs about the world, where it's like, yeah, sometimes you have to go to war and fight, and that's contrasted by Kratos, who is an old soldier who has done horrible things and has, been through wars and is just like, no. We absolutely, you don't want to be in that position. You don't want to, you don't want to do all that. But Kratos never bothers to tell his son about the stuff that he's done. That's the problem. Kratos never sits down and explains the stuff that he's done and why he knows that this is all a bad idea. Okay? Kratos never sits down with his son and go, look, back at the end, when I was a war god, I did horrible things, believing that I was in the right. I killed lots of people. I caused ruin and suffering for lots of people, thinking that I was going to make the world better by doing what I was going to do. I was consumed by the need for vengeance and the need for justice, and in so doing, hurt a lot of people who didn't deserve it. I did a lot of things that were really bad. I lost my entire family, my wife and my daughter, which is why I now look the way I do. Speaking of which, he never bothers to bring up with Loki the fact that he's had a different family. Like, one thing that should come up, I feel like, in these games is the fact that this is family number 2 with Kratos. Like, Kratos spends a whole lot of time talking about his dead wife, and we finally get to see what she looks like, but he never seems to really, like, talk about that this is wife number 2, because apparently wife number 1 and daughter number 1 don't matter anymore. Apparently they are just not in his life and not in his story anymore, and their spirits or their opinions of him or their feelings towards him are just irrelevant now, because Kratos has moved on from them and is now totally focused on dead wife number 2. Anyway, Kratos never bothers to sit down with his son and explain to him all the stuff he did in Greece, which I feel like he needs to do, because when Loki is like, look at what Thor and Odin are doing, look at all the people they're hurting, look at all of these things that clearly need to be fixed, and yeah, it's going to be Ragnarok, and yeah, there's going to be a war, and lots of people are going to die. Kratos is like constantly like, no, we shouldn't do this, no, we should just go home, no, we should like not look into this. And he never explains why, so everybody around him just assumes that he's a coward and that he's a grumbly old man who doesn't want to like help people. Like, they just assume he's a bad person because he won't explain anything at any point. Like, he never sits down and goes, yeah, I did some really bad things, and I've seen where it leads. I've seen the pain that it leads. I've done horrible things in the name of you know, doing the right thing. I have like committed terrible sins and witnessed uncountable tragedies. And I don't want you to go through that. I don't want you to live the kind of life that I lived. I don't want you to have to suffer the same sort of like horrible memories that I have to suffer through. Like, that's the kind of conversation you need to have with your son. And Kratos just never does it at all. Kratos just never bothers to have this conversation with his son. He's just constantly berating his son for not listening and treating him like a child at every possible opportunity. So at the end of the story, it like, there's no resolution to any of this. Because at the end of the story, Loki is just like, yeah, I have to go find the rest of my people. Bye! And he just disappears. And you never see him again in the post-game. Like, Loki essentially is just like, yeah, I'm gonna leave now. I gotta go find the rest of the giants or whatever. Bye! And just disappears. Which, ironically, is the way most things are handled in the post-game. Because the ending of this game is abrupt as hell. Because you would think, hey, we're going to do Ragnarok. Ragnarok, you know, is pretty fleshed out. There's a lot of things that aren't fleshed out in Norse mythology. Ragnarok is pretty fleshed out about what is supposed to happen. That's the whole reason why so much of it is worrying, and why so many depictions of Odin are of him being paranoid and trying to avoid, you know, the end times, because they know what the signs are, and they know what's going to happen, and they know, you know, who's going to kill who when. Okay, they all know this. And so, you would think that they would adhere at least closer to... You think they would adhere close to mythology on this, because mythology gives you a really easy blueprint of, like, really cool ideas. You know, like, for example, in mythology, Fenrir is supposed to kill Odin, okay, and is it Jormungandr? I don't know how to pronounce the name. The giant world serpent is meant to kill Thor, okay, and they're supposed to kill each other at the last battle. Okay, that's what's supposed to happen. And neither of those come into play at any point. Like, neither of those characters. You'd think that they would, because, again, Fenrir dies in the beginning of this game. Except not because Loki takes out Fenrir's soul, which is apparently a thing he can do. And, like, you think, okay, so that's, like, Fenrir in the beginning of the game is, like, a slightly oversized wolf. And they're going to find a way to find, like, a giant wolf and put his soul into it. And you're going to have this giant wolf that's going to kill Odin. Like, you think that's, like, where they're going to go with it. Because, again, mythology has a clear, like, awesome set piece of, you know, fighting Thor and Odin during, you know, the end times and all that stuff. No, they don't do anything with it. It doesn't come back. All right? They go and, you know, they go to Muspelheim and they find Surtur and they're like, hey, you know, end times, you're supposed to come to, you're supposed to come to, like, Asgard and kill everyone. You know, we need you to do that. And he's like, okay, I guess I'm going to become Ragnarok. Because apparently in this game, Ragnarok is not a time, it's not an event, it's a being. And it's a really lame looking being too. Because you think you would be like, I don't know, you think he would look like the Balrog or something, you know? Like, he's a fire giant. You think he should look like super impressive and super, like, demonic and, you know, I don't know, doesn't look impressive, but he's not. He's just like a blue fire, like, tall man that looks almost tree-like because he's made of stone or something. And it's really lame. But anyway, like the World Serpent shows up and he's just, like, in the background. And he just disappears halfway through. And it's like, well, that's that then. You know? Like, he had nothing to do with the story. It's not there. So, you, like, nothing... Like, so much of the end, like, the end time feels abrupt. Because... So, the end time period happens where it's like, you fight Odin, you fight Thor, and then Odin kills him. And then you fight Odin, and you kill him. And then Ragnarok / Surtur stabs a sword into the ground because he's rampaging. And Freyr kicks you into a portal, and you wake up, and then you have a very, very long hallway walking scene where you meet up with literally every character you've met, and they tell you what happened after the battle. They don't actually have you finish the battle. They just have you talk to everybody or have people talk at you to tell you about how their plots ended, because they didn't bother to finish any of their plots, you know? And it just feels really lame, because it's like, yep, there was Ragnarok, and Ragnarok nearly killed you, except he didn't kill you, and then he just disappears from the story, and he's never mentioned again. And it feels like a giant missed opportunity. Because, keep in mind, God of War 3 ended with you fighting Zeus inside Gaia, okay? And, like, beating him up against Gaia's literal heart, alright? And yet this game ends with, like, Odin being all like, I'm too old and can't change, and then he just kind of dies. And it's like, well, that was lame. And then Surtur comes out and stabs the ground, and the game just kind of ends. And it's just really lame. But the reason I'm bringing it up is not necessarily because the gameplay part is lame, but because story-wise, it's really lazy. Like, story-wise, they couldn't find a way to, like, wrap up all of the storylines that they started. And so instead of doing that, they just had you walk down a hallway and listen to everybody exposit to you about how the storylines wrapped up. And it's a really long hallway. Like, and it's not even like small background storylines. No, they have you walk to a point and your son is there and your son's like, yeah, I need to go find, you know, the other giants. Bye. And he disappears from the game forever. Okay, this is a character who was like the focus of the entire plotline for 2 games, and his the end of his story is just him going, I have to go now, father, bye, and disappearing. That's it. And it's amazing. I'm like, why did you spend all this time building him up as this, like, plot centric character that was gonna like change everything if in the end he's like barely relevant to the story. Like he's like he just disappears and goes away, and it's like, okay, like it's so much like, and I know this game, and that's why I'm kind of not sure if I should like talk about games in the future, because like most of this is not about the story. It's about the gameplay, and the gameplay is fine. It's just, it's really disappointing for these two reasons. Like, and they're big reasons. Like, again, so much of this story would be better if Kratos just like talked to people like they were people and explained that, hey, I've been through all this before and it was terrible, as opposed to being vague for no reason. You know, like to everyone. You know, like maybe if he was like, hey, we need to sit down and talk about my previous family, which all died horribly when I went down this path that you're going down, and it was a really bad one, and you shouldn't do it. Here's why you don't trust gods, son, because I trusted the god once, and now I'm the ghost of Sparta because the ashes of my wife and daughter cover my body. Okay? I murdered a pantheon once, son, and it was bad. And you should, you know, you shouldn't go down the path I did, and here's why. Okay? Because so much of this story would not happen if he just talked to his son like a father would, like a human being would. And again, you could write a story where Kratos refuses to talk to his son, but the problem is that the story seems to take his side because he's our protagonist. And so the story and everyone around him seems to take Kratos' side, that it's completely okay to keep his son in the dark about all these important things, despite the fact that he's proven wrong over and over again. Because Kratos is frequently wrong and frequently encountering the results of his wrongness over and over again. But he never seems to think, okay, now is the time where I need to talk to my son, because if I don't talk to my son, he's going to keep doing things to rebel against me, and I'm essentially causing this. I'm to blame. And no, he never has that moment of reflection. And so when he finally decides, okay, we should actually fight at Ragnarok, it comes out of nowhere. It's like a complete 180 for his character, because there's no motivation or reasoning behind it. It's not like his son explains to him, this is why I believe like this. But what should happen narratively is Kratos sits down with his son and he's like, this is all these bad things, and this is my past, and this is why we shouldn't do this. And then you have Loki who turns around and goes, yeah, that was in the past, but this isn't that situation. These two situations are nothing alike. The situation that you were in was you were betrayed and tricked by a god who was using you. And this is a situation where we're not fighting to destroy the Pantheon. We're not fighting to exterminate the gods. We're fighting to defeat one god. Technically two. Although you kill three of them. You kill Heimdall, you kill Thor, and of course then Odin. But it's Sif is still alive, for example. Loki is still alive. There are numerous other gods that are clearly still alive. Thor's daughter is still alive. It's just all of, it's Asgard Asgard falls somehow, literally, into the other realms somehow, but, the gods still exist. It's not like they destroyed the Pantheon. It's not like in God of War 3, where you stab Helios and the sun goes out, It's not like in, God of War 3, where you murder Poseidon and the oceans recede. Whoops. Oops, I killed Hera, now there's no plant life on the earth. Oops, everyone starved to death. It's not like that at all. And so, it just feels very I don't want to say rushed, but it feels like they're at odds. Because on one hand you're like, okay, we have these fights that we want to do, but we don't want to be like we used to be. We want to be all mature and dour all the time. And so we want our character to drag his feet into them. And so when we have them, they're all a letdown. Because there's no real like narrative triumph to defeating these individuals. Like there's no like, so it's like you beat Thor and you're like, I'm not going to kill Thor. And you're like, okay. And then Thor just gets stabbed by Odin. And it's just like, okay, I suppose I should feel something about this, but I don't. I don't really. And then you're like, okay, I kill Odin. And Odin's like, I can't change. And you're like, am I supposed to feel bad? Am I supposed to be happy that he got defeated? Am I supposed to feel triumphant? Am I supposed to feel like I was wrong? And like, how am I, like, it because there's no like emotional coherence to this story, there's no payoff to any of it. It all feels very like, and that happened, and that happened. Like there's no like, are they trying to write a tragedy? Is this supposed to be tragic? If it's supposed to be tragic, you need more bad things happening from your actions. Because, like, Odin dying, like, doesn't, like, he's the villain, like, the big bad villain. So treating him like he's a grandpa who is just like, oh, I can't change, I'm too old. You know, like, am I supposed to, like, how am I supposed to feel beating up an old man? Like, where are we supposed to go with this? What are we supposed to feel like? It would be one thing if it was a situation where it's like Odin and Kratos were two old guys who could never like change, like the tiger can't change his stripes sort of story. Where it's like, we've been fighting for too long and we've been, you know, we're set in our ways and we're headed to a confrontation because neither of us are willing to back down. Like, you could do that, but that's not the story they told. The story they told is Kratos has changed completely and he doesn't want to change back into who he was. And even at the end, he still hasn't changed back into who he was. And so Odin being like a tired, bitter old man doesn't make any sense, or it doesn't feel like it doesn't feel good to beat this game. It doesn't feel like you've accomplished anything. It feels like you've just wasted a lot of time where it's like none of this really needed to happen. Like, why did all this happen? What was the point? Where's the payoff to all of this? Where's the payoff to, you know, 80 hours of gameplay or whatever? Like, what's the emotional feelings that we're all supposed to get? That's what I'm kind of like getting at, or I'm trying to get at. But that's really it. That's Ragnarok. The game is fine. I mean, the gameplay is a lot of fun. It's just narratively lazy in a lot of ways. And I hate to... it's hard for me to put it like this, but honestly, the stories of the original games were much better, despite the fact that they were way more juvenile, because they were way more coherent. Like, the storylines in the original games are ostensibly, these people are bad, go kill them. But at every point, you know how to feel. Because you understand why the characters are acting the way they're acting. You understand their motivations, and you understand, like, their choices, and you understand why they can't turn away from the path that they're on. In this game, none of that makes any sense. Characters act because the plot says so, but as characters, it doesn't make any sense. And if everyone just sat down and talked about the reasons why they would do things, they'd realize they're all on the same fucking side. like Odin is doing all of this, it turns out, because he wants Loki to wear a mask and open up a rift so he can see the truth of creation. You could just tell everybody that. You could just be like, yeah, okay, so we need to do these things, and if we do them, then, like, we'll see the truth of the universe. And I want to do that. And that sounds cool. Don't you want to do that? No, instead I need to, like, murder your family and all this, do all this other convoluted bullcrap for like no reason. And it's just, it's like it all stems from that first like real conversation where they sit down and Odin's like, here's everything you want, and all I want you to do is something else that you want to do already. Can we make an agreement? And Kratos inexplicably is like, no, go fuck yourself. It makes no sense. It makes zero sense. And everything from that point just makes no sense, where characters just do things to do them. It's all illogical. Characters seem to just, like, their motivations never make any real sense. And it's just, like, again, games can have bad stories. Okay, games can have lukewarm stories if the gameplay is good. But it just seems like when they're spending so much time hyping these up as, like, the more mature God of War, and it's like, oh, these games have more story and more heartfelt feelings. And it's like, no, they don't. These games have no feelings. Everything is gray and drab, and Kratos is a boring one-dimensional character now. I mean, he was already a one-dimensional character, but at least you understood why he felt the way he felt. In this game, like, nothing he does makes any sense, except because the game demands that you do it. But yeah, that's God of War Ragnarok. It's a fun game to play, but the story sucks, I guess is the best way to put it. So yeah, story stinks. See y'all later.